Good afternoon, and welcome to the Atlantic Council, both for those of you here in person and those joining online. I'm Lloyd Whitman, Senior Director of the Geotech Center at the Atlantic Council, and today we will be discussing data strategies for an AI-powered government. The goal of this event is to bring together stakeholders from both the public and private sectors to discuss and share the opportunities and challenges for creating federal data infrastructures that are AI ready, as well as what it takes to bring those applications from pilot to enterprise at scale. For those of you not familiar with the Atlantic Council, we're a nonpartisan organization that galvanizes U.S. leadership and engagement in the world in partnership with allies and partners to shape solutions to global challenges, a mission we describe as shaping the global future together. At the Geotech Center, we're shaping that global future by identifying and communicating what is required so that emerging technologies can enter use widely across the globe for public benefit, while identifying and mitigating potential societal and geopolitical risks. We pride ourselves on being a bridge between technologists and global policymakers to develop actionable tech policy, partnerships, and programs. Having joined the Atlantic Council after a long federal career, I appreciate the significant potential for AI to expand the use and impact of federal data, and recognize that there are already over 1,000 AI-related projects currently underway across the federal enterprise. Moreover, many of the most sophisticated and advanced projects have come out of the national security community. I also appreciate that federal agencies creating, using, and managing data are facing rapidly growing volumes of data, hosted both locally and in the cloud, combined with growing demands from both inside and outside the government to use and responsibly share that data equitably and securely. These demands require each enterprise to have a data infrastructure appropriate for AI-enabled applications, along with the capital, human resources, and leadership needed to establish, deploy, and manage those applications effectively. Over the past 6 months, we've discussed these issues privately with a range of IT, data science, and AI leaders and experts in both the public and private sectors. Today, we're sharing and discussing with experts our key findings and recommendations for data strategies for an AI-powered government, from planning to piloting all the way to procurement. For those of you here in person, you will find a printed summary of those findings and recommendations placed at your seat. And if you didn't find it, you'll be crinkling on it because you're sitting on it. This summary and a more expansive version of these findings and recommendations are now live on our website. I'll begin today's discussion with a brief overview of our findings and recommendations, and then we'll have 3 relatively short discussions to bring out the main challenges and opportunities associated with this topic from different perspectives. You'll hear from leaders across civilian and national security agencies and the private sector, and we'll begin with a fireside chat on high-level strategies for bringing data-driven AI insights to the federal enterprise, and then hear from 2 panels, the first on planning and developing AI-centric applications, and the second on piloting and scaling data and AI for mission impact. A few housekeeping notes, especially for those here, before we begin. Participants will be able to send questions to our panelists, both here and online, to our Ask AC Q&A system. You can access this at ask-ac.org. Again, that's ask-ac.org. We'll address a few of those questions at the end of each panel. So, go to one of I have a couple of slides here, being a reformed scientist. I'm going to show you a few slides that highlight some of the key findings and recommendations we'll be talking about, which span across the deployment timeline from planning to procurement. Okay. So we focused on what agencies can do to maximize the value of their data through AI and establish an AI-ready data infrastructure. Our findings and recommendations are structured in 4 key areas. 1, establishing human capital and an AI-ready culture. 2, planning and developing data-centric AI applications. 3, piloting applications, and then 4, procuring and/or scaling those applications. So let me just give you a few examples, and you can, of course, read them all in our online documents. So establishing human capital in an AI-ready culture is front and center, since without doing that up front, everyone will struggle down the road. It's critical to integrate humans into the AI and data management process and obtain leadership buy-in as early as possible. A key approach used successfully at multiple agencies is creating cross-functional task forces or working groups that can identify key questions where data and AI might reveal actionable insights, and then having those stakeholders help drive the development process. In the planning stage, one of the key challenges is that data is often poorly structured and also often siloed. So agencies need to think more proactively about creating data repositories as part of a coordinated data infrastructure. As one moves to pilot stages, it becomes particularly important to manage and maintain the data pipeline, hopefully leveraging that data infrastructure established earlier. Coming back to the people in the equation, something we heard repeatedly was the importance of getting applications into the hands of users early and then getting quick and continuous feedback. Finally, when data-driven AI applications are ready to transition, we get back to that data issue again, and the importance of having that data sufficient to trust the insights and outputs from the deployed applications. So the planning and procurement stage is also another key time to bake in issues like transparency, testing and evaluation, privacy safeguards, and other key elements of responsible AI. So it's now my pleasure to welcome our keynote speakers for our fireside chat, Janice DeGarmo and Dominic Dellamino. Janice is currently the COO at the Kroc Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue and previously served as the director of the Office of Management Strategy and Solutions at the State Department, where she founded the Center for Analytics and served as the department's first acting chief data officer. Dominic is the vice president of Field Technology and Engineering for Amazon Web Services Worldwide Public Sector, and he currently oversees public sector efforts in the cloud and emerging technology space, including the deployment and configuration of responsible AI, quantum computing, and large-scale cloud-based DevOps architectures. In his career, Dominic has assisted government and commercial clients in the application of leading-edge data management, analysis, and software engineering solutions. So it's great to have you here today. AI is certainly having a moment. While much of the discussion is based on generative AI, like ChatGPT, Bard, and others, both for good and bad reasons, there's broad areas of AI that are just built on data sets and machine learning that arguably represent most of the applications across sectors, including those with the potential for use by the government. So, start off with a high-level question: is what are some of the applications that you consider, from your perspectives, both currently and your past experiences? What are the applications that you consider the most exciting for federal use right now? And I'll start. Why don't I start, Dominic, with you?
Sure. Thanks, Lloyd. And before we get started, I wanted to apologize that Max Peterson couldn't join us today. I know this is a topic that's near and dear to his heart, and he's certainly excited about it, but circumstances didn't permit. So I'm looking forward to the discussion and hope we can really get to some great answers here. When we talk about some of the most exciting applications of AI, you mentioned some of the excitement around generative AI, but also the fact that it's broadened the discussion of AI in general. And I think there's several different exciting applications that we're seeing where AI is getting into production use cases that include ways to improve logistics, to improve routing of packages. We do this on our side, but also all the logistics elements that the federal government has to do, from delivering the mail to defense logistics, using AI to help make those delivery systems more efficient and predict when weather and other things might impact them really is an important use case. We're also seeing just the more prevalent use of it for predictive maintenance. How do we make sure that we understand when is it time to rotate things in for maintenance, even maybe before we might know or see where it's obvious, but AI can help us make that predictive element. And then thirdly, I think we're seeing this particularly in disaster relief and humanitarian aid. How do we make sure we're staging and predicting where we need to put supplies, where we need to get ahead of, where we need to make sure that capabilities to help serve people in these crisis events are ready to go when we need them and where we need them. So certainly cases where we're seeing AI and ML happening today to affect those particular use cases across the board.
So Janice, you actually worked in a somewhat different realm, actually looking at, I think more practical things and a place with a lot of data at the State Department before your current role. I don't know, where do you see the things that are, that you're working on, or that that you can see in that kind of agency?
Yeah, I think I can speak to a little bit from State Department and foreign policy and international relations. Look, in that realm, the name of the game is being able to synthesize information quickly to inform policy, to inform actions, to inform decision making, right? And so at State Department, and frankly everywhere else, information is exponentially growing and growing and growing. And whoever can capture it, digest it, seize it, is gonna win. And so at State Department, I think information is sort of like an occupational hazard there. There's a lot of it. And so I think it used to be State Department just would, there was cables from our diplomats on the ground, right? And now it's cables and satellite imagery and intel and news and media. And there's a lot more inputs. So so whoever can bring it in and use it wisely and use it smart and make decisions fast and smart are gonna be able to move quickly. So the good news at State Department, tons of use cases, and I think, and tons of ways that they're implementing AI, whether it's cybersecurity and using data and AI and machine learning to sort of detect and understand patterns and targets and networks. That is one that's live regularly, and really an important one because they are a major cyber target, right? There's public diplomacy use cases where they're using to synthesize media quickly and in different languages so they can predict how someone's going to react. Similarly, they're doing sentiment analysis. They're using AI to predict voting for UN. They're using AI, the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization is using AI and satellite imagery to look at flagging potential conflicts. So all to say there's a lot to do in the foreign policy space.
I think there was I was reading this, I think they're doing this now even to quickly figure out how to declassify years and years of cables.
They are working, this is something, that the Center for Analytics is working on with the information services where they've trained models to make decisions on declassification with 97% accuracy. Yeah. So, and I think they would say the 3%, is a data quality issue, but that's
still a lot of work too.
That's still, really an incredible cost savings. And again, so I think there's a lot out there, and I think it's just the beginning. I would say with all of those use cases and all of those pockets throughout State Department and federal government, there's still pockets, and I think there's still a huge need to sort of educate the broader workforce.
Yeah, because I do know, certainly there's also, in our process talking to some of the other civilian agencies, science agencies have huge amounts of data on grants and grant applications and administrative data that's of interest, as places like HUD, and so I think there's just a wealth of applications if that data could be in the right format, that it could be used really, really well. Which kind of does bring us to the sort of data infrastructure question, including the people generating, maintaining, and using the data. That's really the foundation of so many applications. And so from the private sector, maybe I should ask, I'll say, what do you see the agencies need to do better to really benefit from that potential? And from the public sector side, maybe from your experience at State, where you were actually working this problem personally, what's your experiences been in terms of getting that infrastructure and that culture to move forward?
Yeah, data management and infrastructure is really, really important, and we never led with that because no one ever wanted to talk about that. But it is the most important thing. And frankly, Lloyd, your findings in your report are so spot on because they start with culture, because that's the most important part. You need to be able to train and upskill and teach people how to use data so that you can manage the data, so that you can use the data, and so that you can gain insights from the data. I will say, I think what we learned very quickly, and we led with this at State Department, is that data management infrastructure is not a technology problem. It's a culture problem. And so, you can create incredible technology stacks and have really great tools and have tools that come in and clean your data and sanitize it, but you still have to start with, there's still a people, culture, and process part that you need to start with.
So how did you, so what people do to sort of to get that culture going and to get people to think about this?
So there's like the training and education piece, which is hugely important at State Department. It's part of their enterprise data strategy to upskill. So there's courses that we taught on data literacy. But then what I think was really smart what the Center for Analytics did is they coupled their whole enterprise data strategy was powered by campaigns, and campaigns were powered by use cases and problem sets that were real to policymakers. And instead of saying, all right, we're going to come to the table to talk about data quality or data management, it said, we're going to come to talk about malign influence in China and how we can figure out how to prioritize engagement on China issues.
It's
And
it's
then-
that use case of saying, oh,
And
that's
then-
something I want to work on.
Oh, that's something I want to work on. I have real problems. And we would say, what problem are you trying to solve? And then in solving that problem, we would peel it back enough that we would get to really deep data management issues and deep data siloing issues. And within that use case, we would hit culture, we would hit data management, we would hit data governance, and then we would hopefully, provide insights that could solve the problem. So at State, they took that approach on, whether they did that on multilateralism, they did it with DEIA, with diversity issues. And within every one of those use cases, we would get to training via use case so that everyone within all aspects of a process could see how important data management was at each level.
And did you also bring, get those people together and also on the people who own the infrastructure, own the data, who own the IT?
Yeah, I mean, I think the DEIA one, just because it's like a real use case across all of government as they try to think about how do we look at diversity, inclusion, and equity across, and how do we understand what root cause and problems are. And so they brought everyone. So when you talk about what were some of the problems, you had to go down to, well, what data can we use? Well, what data can we see? Well, who can see this? What are the rules of the road of who can see this? Well, what technology is being used? And then, oh, by the way, what problem do we need to solve? So it would bring everyone together.
So Dominic, I know from the private sector side, without naming names, maybe, or you can say the good ones, not the bad ones. So when people are coming to you and saying, do your AI magic on my data, what is it you're seeing? What are people who are doing it right, and what are some of the things you're saying? Wow, I wish they had done, sort of done this and beforehand before they come saw us.
Yeah, and to be fair, a lot of federal government agencies specialize in producing data and data as a product, right? And so when we go to places like BLS or Census, we actually see a very strong data culture that talks about producing data as a product. Repeatedly refreshing data, providing people with the opportunity to provide feedback and make corrections to data. And so this data culture that thinks of data as a live product that isn't always good or bad, but rather useful, not useful for specific use cases, is an important upgrade, if you will, in understanding. And so places we see that do this well recognize that data, we're going to have more data than we've ever thought possible. And so immediately thinking that we can just bucket it one or two ways probably isn't going to be sufficient to adapt to some of the changing nature of data that one day might not be useful, but tomorrow might be. And so thinking about an approach that makes data visible, provides people with the opportunity to provide feedback on data, to correct issues in data, to highlight when data is no longer useful for a specific use case. So this becomes almost a data ops problem, where you're thinking more about not what was a data product that we produced 3 years ago that we can reuse, but rather how is that data changing in a very rapidly changing world, and how are we continue to have a process, a mechanism, and a culture that can adapt to data that comes into us and figure out how it's going to be useful. And that has to happen almost in real time nowadays. And so that is a crucial ingredient to making sure that if you're going to base decisions on that data or train AI on that data, that you're cognizant of those changes and how you're adapting and managing risk of AI using data that's stale, out of date, maybe not ready for use yet, and understanding when that makes sense, when it doesn't. But that is a real important element of understanding data quality and making sure it's ready for this AI deployment.
Yeah, it's sort of that comment I think I made about maintaining that data pipeline. That's a it's a dynamic thing. It's not here it is, and so it's you have to keep feeding it and feeding back on it as well. So I mean, do you have some example? Some of the things that you've worked on with agencies where you've seen this done really worked really well. Even
Yeah, I think early, again, what we're seeing are the agencies that said, we're going to run experiments. We're going to say, we have a use case, we have some data, we'd like to see if this data can be useful to support AI and part of our making decisions. And so where I've seen agencies really make good progress, and organizations as well, is where they really start with that, how are we going to measure if this works?
Right.
Not just, if it's magic, fairy dust, we're going to put on everything, but rather, here's a use case, we think it will work well here. Okay, let's get the data we think we need. Let's train the model we think will help. We have a criteria by which we're going to determine if we've gotten return on that investment and we're able to get the success criteria that we're looking for. And they learn a ton. And then they share those learnings, more importantly. It's not just some skunkworks group or an individual small group that is the key team that understands everything, but rather sharing and helping the rest of the organization understand what's possible, what to look for, what to watch out for, how to do all of the aspects of meaning that operational culture around data and AI, besides just, look, we did something and look how interesting it is. It has to be something that you're going to get a continuous operational benefit out of and will continue to improve. And I think when we see organizations make that investment, they not only get initial benefit, but they continue to receive the benefit on an ongoing basis. And that durable benefit is when we've seen organizations really take advantage of and get that full benefit.
Yeah. And it's why I highlighted that comment about thinking about all this very early as possible and things. And I will say we will be hearing some good examples of from the Bridge the AI program in the panels subsequently from NIH and about Project Linchpin and the Army of some people who are actually doing this and getting it done. So we will hear some more specifics as we move forward here today. So it's hard not to talk about generative AI right now, I guess it's having a moment, as I said, and so I'm curious, from your perspectives, given everyone wants to hear about it, maybe I'll start back with you, Dominic. What are for agencies that are thinking about what is this and how can I, we'll talk about how to use it productively. What are some of the things that people should be doing now to prepare and to be thinking about so that they can responsibly and productively use it in down the road, even if it's not right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly an impressive technology that the excitement is real, and it's normal to see people say, "Wow, this is great. What can we do here?" And I think key to this is, first off, kind of understanding how generative AI works, what it's been trained on, what it's learned from the data it's been trained on, and what kind of content it can generate, and whether or not that's something you need. I think preparing for this is, if you're going to use generative AI, what are you looking for it to generate for you? And then having that concrete thought process of, okay, I'm using it to generate summaries of content, or I'm using it to help understand questions that come in and common themes that we're getting as a request. Looking at ways to use generative AI to assist the workflow or assist the work you're doing. And so that's the first bit, is really making sure you've got a use case rather than just you should explore the technology, but toward a use case really helps get that more concrete. From a responsible use perspective, this gets to, okay, as we're going to accept things that we want to send to generative AI, let's think about making sure that we're consistent in how we ask questions of a generative AI system, because one of the early things we're learning is the slight variations in how you phrase something or even format something can produce different kinds of output. And so from a responsible use perspective, where you have to be consistent in the data and answers you provide, this is an area you want to make sure that you are paying attention to, number one. Number two, on the flip side, the output that is generated, what's the process to vet, validate, and verify that output against known sources early on, so you can feel comfortable that the AI is producing the kind of output that you are comfortable standing behind when you present it as something that you want to represent out of your system. So this gets to, okay, how do we ensure that we can look at the content that's generated? Is it referring to something we know? Is it constrained by data that we wanted to talk about? How are we doing those things to make sure that we're not, while generative AI is exciting in what it could potentially generate, oftentimes we want to make sure it's generating the stuff that we think it should. So that's another area of responsibility that I think any agency or organization is thinking about when they plug in generative AI to generating content for them, is what's the copy edit process look like? What is the process that looks like that assures that the content meets your standards, is usable, and refers to things that you're comfortable having out there. So those are early things. You may not know how to do those things yet, but understand that you're going to need that function, and getting people trained and available to perform those functions is the first step in making sure you're prepared to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I have a former colleague, one of the favorite expressions, which I like and really applies to this and many things, which is, think of the end at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so Janice, I want to give you an opportunity to also talk about this topic, both from your past experience, and I also know this is a topic of interest to the Kroc Institute as well, in different domains. So, again, where do you see leaders should be thinking about this, and perhaps both from a positive use, but also from a responsible and tracking misuse of this technology as well.
Yeah, Dominic hit many of the points. I would say, I think that generative AI really amplifies a lot of the discussions that we have around just general data. I think it's just that now when we talked about AI in the past, people would say, well, that's a data scientist issue or like a technologist issue, and we need to think about it and train on it. Well, now generative AI has really amplified that. It's a knowledge worker issue. Everyone needs to understand how to use. So I will say it until I'm probably blue in the face, but training and education and culture and upskilling is the single most important thing we need to do to be able to use this well and to be able to govern it well, because you can't govern what you don't understand. And I think, even something as simple as the average person needs to learn prompt engineering, needs to learn how to ask the right questions.
A term that didn't exist until yesterday,
didn't exist
right?
until, right? And
now there's job opportunities for prompt engineering.
That's right, and so blankly asking questions will get you an answer. You don't know. And so if you don't know what the risks are, you just don't know whether it can be enormously useful. I've used it to write a lot of things.
I did not use it to write any of these questions. I
did not use it to write the answers, unfortunately.
These were all my own personal intelligence.
Right, but I think, and we think about that a lot. So state, that was a core tenet of how we thought about empowering data-informed diplomacy at State Department. It's a really important aspect of how we think of, at the Kroc Institute, of how we adopt and innovate around trusted technology, is that there's a really huge component of training and education. And at the Kroc Institute, I will say that is one of our biggest demands, from whether it's our allies, whether it's from corporations, whether it's from federal government, is help us understand AI, not only the application of it within operationally, but how we think about it from a policy perspective with geopolitical risks and governing it. And I think, so I think that's incredibly important. I think generative AI has just put a spotlight on that, right?
Yeah, well, certainly the Biden-Harris administration has been pretty forward-leaning on things, and I know we'll be heard a lot, and we'll be hearing more about that, and including how it's going to be used in the government. So we'll stay tuned for that. We still have time, talking about some of the recommendations here, and curious, from some of your, hopefully you've had a chance to look them over. If there's things that that really resonated with you, that you'd really, you look at this and you really like to call out to federal colleagues to pay attention to. And so, I don't know, Janice, perhaps, I think some of these things look quite familiar because we have talked to some of your colleagues in the past.
Yeah, look, I think the strategy is spot on. You open up with AI-ready culture. An AI-ready agency means not only technology, but it means human capital and hiring for this. It means making sure you're asking what the data is saying. It means creating your cross-functional task force is exactly how thinking through the campaigns that the State Department was running. Rewarding, you say rewarding risk-taking on AI projects. I think that's an incredibly important thing. We need to be talking about it more. It's about risk management, not risk aversion. You need to be able to, there's going to be some risk. If you can start small and understand how to use it, and maybe you have to pivot some because you make some side steps. But I think that's rewarding risk-taking on AI projects is going to be really important. And then I think the single most important thing that you mentioned here is examining roadblocks. And I think for a lot of them, again, I think you can integrate technology into agencies pretty easily, but not pretty easily, but you can do it. But I think when you look at roadblocks, you have to look at process and data silos, and that's a culture decision that needs to be managed from the top. And I think some agencies have really taken that on. I think DoD sent a memo out a year or two ago saying, data is not yours, data is the department's,
Right.
and we will manage it and govern it, but you can't not share it. You share it with appropriate guardrails.
Yeah, it's just for those who aren't following this particular recommendation is framed as examining roadblocks to moving each use case forward and ensuring the necessary workforce is available given the scale of each problem. So again, if there's a problem and there's a reason, you're going to identify that, get the right people involved and the right number of people, and that forward. And I don't know if Dom, if you want.
Yeah, I think I want to echo the
things.
roadblocks one, because I've seen a lot of organizations that basically have said, we're not going to use this. We're shutting down all access, and you're not allowed to. And I understand the reaction from a risk management perspective, but I think it's helpful to describe, okay, what are the situations under which we would consider using it? What are the guidelines for examining and being transparent of when you're going to use it for a particular use case, or being transparent about, I'm using content that was generated, and here's the prompt I provided to it, and here's not only the prompt, but the context I provided. So one of the really interesting things about generative AI is that you can provide extra context around a question so that the answer is provided within that kind of context. This is really useful for personalized use cases, and I think that's where we're starting to see real excitement about generative AI, is not just in answering basic questions. We've had FAQ chatbots for a long time that can do that. But where we're seeing some real power with generative AI is this personalization and accepting of context. But that goes through a culture that can accurately describe context, constrain a response to context. And so having that kind of education and guidance helps, I think, remove just the blind roadblock, but rather helps people understand, here's how we think we can use this, here's what we would like to hear from you when you're going to use this, and here's the risk management approach that we'd like to take, rather than we're just not going to do anything, but a more effective understanding of risk management and how to address it in this context, I think is really useful.
Yeah, there's another phrase, I'll borrow from another area that we work in about, one has to look at the risk of doing it versus the risk of not doing it.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and to the mission and to being, what you might miss. Yeah, so I mean, personally, I guess I get to answer my own question as well. Looking at this, a lot of this comes back to the sort of user-centered design principles of having people involved in the in from the start. I was looking at the scaling things that we heard about, identifying. I don't know what I was talking about. Being forward-leaning with people who are on the, to quote one of the people who we spoke to, on the forward tip of the spear, right? The people who are really out there, and then also combining those with the data professionals, the people who need to solve the problem, and the people who have the data to solve the problem, and really putting them together. So I mean, I guess we still have a few minutes left, and I think maybe to phrase this another way, I always like to say, if you had one thing you really wanted to say to your colleagues out in the world about, here's what I learned, and here's what if you can only do one thing, here's the thing you should really, really focus on. And maybe you've said it already, but I'll start with I'll give you that word, and then I'll.
Yeah, well, first off, I think sessions like this are really helpful. What we're finding, we've both mentioned this, the need for education, understanding, and learning more. And that only happens in an environment where you encourage people to ask questions about AI, what it can do, what it can't do, what do they need to be prepared for, and then not being afraid to ask those questions and also share what's been learned. And so constant kind of discussions like this at different levels I think are super important, because some people are going to go faster than others, and others are going to want more information before they feel comfortable. And so it's okay to have regular education sessions where you're exploring and getting those questions out on the table and understanding the best answers for that. So that's where I've seen people have success, is they recognize it's going to be a journey. We're just, Adam Slipsky has said, we're 3 steps into a 10K race. So there's so much that is in front of us that now's the time to do discovery, ask questions, share those learnings, and make sure you're understanding all of the different options that are available, because they continue to appear at a fast rate. So be prepared to evaluate options and understand what makes sense and how you're going to evaluate them.
I think that's really perfect. Well said. I would I would say upskill and iterate constantly. And if you have a mindset, that growth mindset, where you're upskilling and you're iterating and you're upskilling and you're iterating, I think that you can do just about anything if you're keeping your skills fresh and you're understanding what you're embarking on. I get excited about using AI to teach AI, right? Of custom courses and generating to help generate how you need to learn, right? And in that upskilling process, and I think that's going to be ultimately where it's going to be a very individual upskilling process, because it's learning what you need to know and then making it a little easier.
Yeah, no, I always say, we've talked about we'd love to be part of, in different agencies, doing design thinking workshops around these kind of topics. And this goes back to, what are some of the things we could do? If we could only do this, it would be great. I think for me, talking to former colleagues, it's really about, thinking about, it's that data as a product, and thinking about it as, what can we learn from it, and figuring out, to get to not start from a no, but how do we get to yes, to share and make use of this and figure out, again, that goes back to both the culture and also thinking about it in the beginning and building those infrastructures and setting up the ways that people can, so we can get data out of all of those silos. I know some of our other panels are a bit larger, so I think we're at a good place here to move forward a little bit. I want to thank you both. It's been great conversation. Thank you for all your insights, and I'm going to now actually turn it over to my deputy director, Raul Brenz, to actually introduce the next panel discussion.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Yeah, thanks, Lloyd.
Before Raul introduces the panel, I said we're going to take a brief pause while our next panel takes the stage. Please stay with us here or online. We won't be long, and we have a great group coming up, so we'll be right back.
Good afternoon. I'm Raul Brenz, the Deputy Director of the Geotech Center. It is my pleasure to introduce the panelists for the next discussion, a panel on planning and developing data-centric AI applications. This discussion will be led by Brian Lane. Brian is a writer, speaker, and technology advisor focused on using data and AI for public good. He is currently serving as a Chief of Business Intelligence at the FDIC, but participating today in his personal capacity. Joining Brian will be Garrett Bernstein. Garrett is the Director for Technology and National Security at the National Security Council, on detail from the State Department, where he is the Deputy Chief Data Officer and helped to establish the department's Center for Analytics. We also have on stage Viv Pavone Har. Viv is the Chief Data Scientist and Director of the AI Discovery Lab at Accenture Federal Services. Prior to joining Accenture Federal Services, she worked in academia and published extensively with the University of Texas at Dallas and the University of Arizona. Lastly, joining them will be Haluk Rasat. Haluk, a program director at the National Institute of Health in the Office of Strategic Coordination, which is also known as the NIH Common Fund. Dr. Rasat is the program leader for the NIH Common Fund's Bridge to Artificial Intelligence program. The Bridge to AI program is generating new, ethically sourced, trustworthy, well-defined, and accessible flagship data sets and best practices for artificial intelligence and machine learning analysis. Now, I'll turn it over to Brian to begin our discussion.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with such an incredible panel, and I think we're going to cover some topics today related to data and culture and some of the exciting advancements around artificial intelligence. And so I think to kick things off, I have an initial question to help everyone get to know each other at the table. Can you tell us a little bit about the things that you're doing in data, both from a technology infrastructure perspective and from a culture perspective, to prepare data for AI applications? And maybe for the first round, let's start with you, Garrett, and we'll kind of go all the way down.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And appreciate being here, obviously. So, I guess I'm kind of an interesting position right now where I'm on a detail in a very policy-heavy role. But before that, I was leading kind of a very operational data science and analytics team. So maybe I'll kind of give quick kind of two answers. I guess on the policy side, I think the most important thing you can do to drive data culture is just like ask the right questions. And be, I would say, not satisfied with the norm of what you usually get. And that really includes basically sometimes being hard-nosed about asking for the numbers about things. We often in policy can be in a realm where we're used to paragraphs and lots of text, and that's important part of policy, but you have to push the envelope and ask for questions. And if you're in a policy role, you can really move the culture of an organization by asking those questions. And then on the flip side of that, in my operational role, it was trying to deliver those questions to policymakers in the best possible way that we could, basically. Yeah.
That's great. And so driving both policy and execution and delivery to drive change in the organization. Viv, what about you? What are you doing?
So I have a very interesting role because I work a little bit more on the innovation side of things. And so traditionally, I've been working as the director of our Analytics Innovation Hub, which meant that in a lot of cases, we worked across the board through with many agencies. And I love how you started, Garrett, because it was very much asking the question, and then asking the question of, not only what are you trying to do, but who is the end user, who's the consumer of what we're trying to get to. And a lot of this was going through the process of how do we make analytics efficient, and how do we actually help drive this transformation so people can use data properly and that it is digestible. So it isn't just a number on the screen, but it's actually an actionable situation. And in the preparation of that took many different flavors because we were working across the board.
Yeah, great. So we have moving the organization and delivery on one side. We have innovating with the users and in a partnership on the other. Haluk, what are you doing today?
At NIH, as you know, we deal with the personal health information quite a bit. In that sense, we need to be extremely careful how the personal health information data is being used by the community in the AI applications in principle. In that sense, like Bridge to AI program is really emphasizing how we can get the data sets ready in the right way, like by considering the ethical consideration, legal implications, and so on, and societal implications as well. In that sense, we are really bringing together diverse research teams together so that we have diverse voices on the table when we are designing the projects to collect data, handle the data, make it available to the public for AI applications and so on. In that sense, we are really emphasizing the ethical and bias aspects of the data generation, and as well as use by for the secondary use and so on. With that, in that sense, like having a diverse voices at the table is extremely important. This way, you can capture different aspects of how we approach the problem, and so that's really we are emphasizing that now in our Bridge to AI program. On top of that, we are also giving some funding to the researchers to get their data sets AI ready, using the approach that the NIH and others are developing. So in that sense, we are really emphasizing getting the data generated and used the right way, and by considering the ethics and so on in the process as well.
Yeah, well, I think we've like hit all the topic areas, and so when I hear everything you're working on, I'm thinking about recent conversations that I've had in academia and government and industry as well, and it feels like we're really at an inflection point with what we're able to do with preparing data and making data ready for AI use cases. I know one of the things that recently has changed in thinking for me has been the use of artificial intelligence to enrich data. Before, we had a problem with data labeling and data enrichment and data quality, and now we're seeing artificial intelligence powered tools are able to take that data and make it useful at scale. And so when you combine it with things like driving the organization and protecting and using data in an ethical way, I think that opens up a real opportunity to deliver some pretty incredible services to the public and to the market. I do have another question about what comes after we've made this technological advance. How do we get the workforce ready for new emerging technology, techniques, methods that are coming out and available today? Maybe Viv, we can start with you.
Sure. So I think getting the workforce ready is a very critical component of what we're doing, because we talk about digital transformation and this move towards AI, but none of it really comes into play unless we have people that can understand it and implement it in an easily and transferable way. And I think that there's a lot that needs to happen with regards to the education and the upskilling. But before we even get there, I think the initial step has to be to get that human buy-in. If people don't see the value of the analytical proposition that is being put into place and how that actually affects their jobs and provides efficiencies, that transformation overall will end up falling flat, because it will be seen as an imposition and not something that's advantageous. And so I am a data scientist by training, but I think that for me, one of the very, very first things that we need to start doing and that we need to start pursuing is making sure that the human on the other end of the spectrum feels comfortable with what we're proposing, sure, and that there's that buy-in of, oh, okay, I see the value in this, and now I understand why I have to apply this new tool, this new methodology.
Yeah. Haluk, how are you treating the workforce today?
Yes, I like to build on what we've said. So as you know, most of the AI models that are being used are more like closed box kind of models. We really do not understand what the model is doing, to be honest. So in that sense, like, we need to train the workforce in a way that they truly understand what the model can do, and don't use it for unintentionally use it for wrong purposes for that. So in that sense, like, as you know, every model has a domain of validity. So when you go outside that domain of validity, then you start running into problems that might lead to even hurting people unintentionally in this sense. So in that sense, like, we really need to train the diverse workforce who really understand the details, fine details of what AI models can do, and how they should be used, and for what purpose they should be used in that sense. Like, really, we need to go deep in the training in that sense. Otherwise, we might really end up with cases that people use models for the purposes that model wasn't built for, and that's going to lead to unintended consequences in that sense. I really like to emphasize that.
Sure. Yeah. And this is something that comes up pretty regularly, right?
Exactly.
Is both responsible use and trust. And I think along with training comes comes trusting the tools and the capabilities. And I think there's a few things that I've noticed, especially working across different government agencies and academia and industry. There are a lot of questions on how to address the workforce issue. And is it a hiring, is it a hiring issue? Is it how do we get the right skill sets on the team? Do we address this with things like fellowships or industry partnerships or strategic partnerships in general? So Garrett, maybe you have some thoughts
I
there.
think you could have basically like a whole day worth of discussion about workforce issues for anyone that I've talked with on this issue. It's like one of my favorite things sort of just to discuss because I think it's the highest ROI. So I guess I would kind of hit, I think, on two things. I think, and again, you could talk about private sector, training, all this stuff, but two big things would be, I think, the importance to see this as like the need for cross-functional teams. The teams that deliver the best products, in my experience, are not a bunch of data scientists. It's a data scientist with engineer, with a designer, with the person who knows the subject matter, right? You kind of get the right mix of people in the room, and that's when kind of magic happens. But our structures, in particular in government, are not great to do that. They're to create that sort of magic moment. And so we have to be willing to sort of be dynamic and just find a way to force that structure, and that's when you build, I think, good products and deliver results to customers who then start to see the light and kind of believe in it. So that would be my first thing. And then I think the second is we do just need this talent in government. We always will need our partners in the private sector, whether consultancies, tech companies, software companies. That's not going away. But oftentimes the biggest blocker is just those things that have to be inherently governmental work. And to your point, if a government person leading a team doesn't know or have that comfort with what's happening in the model, or this, they'll either break and we'll just wait, or they'll make a mistake. And so I think we have a real responsibility to improve pathways into government for more technical talent.
Yeah.
And I think this leads us to this great scenario where we have the collaboration, right? It's not just one team building from like a analytics perspective. It definitely has to follow that contextual knowledge. And that comes a lot from the government communication and scenario that you're talking about. So I think that's great.
Yeah, totally.
Synergy right there.
I like to emphasize that like government and the commercial partnerships will be very important because there's so much advance in the commercial space that government can adopt. And then both parties can really help each other quite a bit. And then at NIH, we have like data scholarship programs and so on to help with the workforce development as well. And one thing that we are seeing a lot, as Greg kind of mentioned, that when you bring the engineers and the bioethicists together, you see there's an immediate tension between those two groups, like how to address the data-related issues, things like that. In that sense, like bringing diverse teams together, it will be extremely critical for the proper use of the AI going forward with that.
Yeah, I have seen this over and over again where you have stakeholder groups working together. I refer to this as carrying bubbles, right? You have this coalition of the willing or groups with competing interests that are working together, and it's a very fragile team. Like at any second it could pop and just and disappear, right? And so I've thought a lot about that from a team building perspective, and I'm wondering, have you all observed anything, any vignettes from executive leaders that are looking at this concept of a cross-functional team, and they're saying, how can we signal, strategic commitment to multi-discipline stakeholders working together?
I'll start. I'll say that the changes in technology have really been a big trigger for this. And I'm going to go a little bit further behind and just say, like, when the pandemic initially surfaced, it really triggered this huge amounts of data that were available, and then this desire to do something to help interagency, but also the mission themselves. And that really pushed, I think, in a lot of ways, the communication of the cross-team collaboration and the desire to be able to understand of, now we have this data, we have to do something with it. Who can clean it? Who can process it? Where can it live? How do we get it to mission ready? And now with the introduction of generative AI, we're going through that even further, where now none of it happens without the right cloud environment or the processing power, or who's going to be my prompt engineer that gets to understand this. All of these things are just forcing functions, and I think that the fact that they're becoming even more organic makes all of us have to react to it, but it should be a level of response preemptive to that.
Yeah, so this reminds me, I feel like maybe the last couple of years there had been a lull in data and AI during the pandemic, and now we're starting to see momentum take off again. As we're achieving this momentum moving forward, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing with preparing data and getting ready for AI-powered applications?
There's a lot of challenges, I guess I would say. So, one big one is, well, there are two big ones. I would say policy is a big challenge, actually. A lot of times when you look at what most agencies have their policy written down somewhere in a manual, and for us, we looked at our data management, sort of part of the FAM, which is our policy at State Department, and I don't think it had been updated in like 9 years or something, and a lot has changed, and so we've updated it, right? So policy can really help. You don't usually walk into a room with a stakeholder and say, I want your data, read this policy. People will still kind of be like, okay, I don't know about that, just because it's in the policy. But it does really help. And the process of making the policy is actually probably the most important part, because if people have objections about things like sharing or use of data, you make them give track change edits in a document, or you make them give comments in a document and say, it's black and white. I need you to write down what your policy what your concerns are about data sharing or AI use or whatever. And then now we're in brass tacks. Like now we are actually debating on the merits instead of what a lot of times happens is kind of rules of thumb. Oh, we don't do that, or we don't share that, or that.
Sure.
You got to write it down. And so we have kind of, I don't know, weaponized might be too aggressive of a word, but we have used policy a lot to try to drive the discussion and move forward.
And any challenges in your organization?
Yeah, there is a big hunger for for some leadership, especially from the government side, about standardization of the data sheets and then how we can get AI data as AI ready in that sense. So in that sense, we are really lacking a standardization of those. What needs to go into the characterization of data sets? For example, which kind of metadata that you need, which kind of fields, descriptor fields that you need for that. And then even getting to basic standardization is a big hustle in that sense. So maybe government agencies can provide that leadership for the scientific community. And the second thing is also, even if you have some sort of standards, you also need to have right types of ontologies and the schemas in place so that you can establish interoperability between different data sets. So in that sense, generating data and putting into a certain data lake or a certain repository is part of the data generation effort. But when you have multiple data resources that you need to interlink with each other, then interoperability issues become a really big issue, a big issue. In that sense, some leadership in that will be extremely beneficial to them, improvements in the AI field as well. So standardization and then creating the right ontologies for description of data.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah. Viv, any thoughts, challenges?
I think a lot of times it is the sharing. I think that's just so difficult. It's one of those things where I like the way that we went from policy to standardization, because it's the initial steps of there's a reason why we're doing this and it's been written down, and then once we kind of get it in a way that we can all speak the same language, so to speak, then it really comes to being truly powerful. But I'll go back to getting the human to buy in, getting that buy-in from why it matters is really one of those pivotal moments.
Yeah.
Can I add one other?
Of course,
so
absolutely.
I think we often get compared in government, I guess. We get compared sometimes oh, Google can do this, or this tech company. If you look at legacy companies that are 150 years old, or Ford or whatever, they're dealing with legacy IT also. They're struggling against upstarts like Tesla, who went over 20 years ago or something. They're competing with companies that built in a new world where they could have cloud services and they could do all of these, built sort of to be AI ready at the start. And so, yeah, we do have a lot of legacy IT. I mean, that is just a reality. We built IT systems when the internet started, and they haven't necessarily been built in a certain way to do AI. So there is just a lot of IT modernization work that just we need to do and probably prioritize the most important ones first. And that's what agencies are doing also.
Yeah, kind of synthesizing all of this information and taking one or two questions from the audience, right? This topic of trust comes up over and over again. And I think that goes to legacy IT, modernizing your systems and trusting new systems as they come online, trusting the data that you have, trusting that you're going to enable and empower your users without doing harm. I'm going to go back to Mr. Rogers. I'm going to say when it comes to AI assurance, if you can mention it, you can manage it, right? And so if you're open about what the shortcomings of your systems are, what the imperfections in your data and your methods, and you're realistic about the kinds of things that you can that you can accomplish with AI-powered tools, I think it's much better in putting a step forward to get users to trust what the tools are doing.
Totally.
And I think we're probably down to kind of a speed round of questions. So let's go with it. Do you have any advice for for people that are pursuing AI or looking into building and deploying AI-powered tools in the future?
Interesting. I would almost steal yours. I thought it was a great point. I mean, just find a thing that has an impact, and it has to matter. It has to really matter to your customer, and there are ways to suss that out. One way that we've seen work is just genuinely like, will your customer meet with you regularly? Will they go to bat for data access, right? These questions. And if they do, they probably really care about the problem. And so if you solve that problem, they're going to be, championing you.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? How do you detect that signal in a large organization with many users, competing stakeholders? How do you find the demand? How do you find the signal in the noise?
Yeah, I think some teams do sort of like an internal consulting model. They literally have like a front page where people can submit ideas. That's a thing that has worked. But then I think some of it is you do have to just engage with people and sort of talk with users and talk with leaders who are investing in these things and actually kind of just get a sense. I don't have a good answer, honestly. You got to feel it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Viv, advice for those that are ready to dip their toe in AI-powered tools?
I think it's to remember that they are contextual, right? They can be, in a lot of ways, seen as these black boxes. And that's an unfortunate reality until you dig really, really, really deep. But it is possible. But I think that if we remember that a lot of it is very contextual, you're using AI to answer a specific question. You're using it because there's an expectation of efficiencies, of improvements, of something that's better at the end of that, or just a reduction of redundant work or busy work, as simple as that. And when we think about it that way, then everything that you're building, reason that you would want to submit your data, that you would want to run a model, or that you want to run an implementation makes a lot more sense. So keeping it contextual to there's an objective, there's a goal, and it can be done. And in a lot of ways, you're seeing it in a day-to-day life. I mean, if you watched Netflix last night, you used AI.
Sure.
And it probably helped you. So why not do it at work?
Yeah, I think about this, and you reminded me of something. When we communicate about artificial intelligence, I kind of say like the level one is let's automate the space in between decisions, right? You have to read a document and summarize it. You have to crunch some numbers and get an output, right? You're not making a decision off of that data, but you're taking the clutter in between decision points and you're shrinking it down, right? And then over time, if we go back to the topics that we talked about for trust and documentation of how systems perform and assurance, now you can get to the point where you have a very high degree of confidence where you can automate decisions. And we see this in business process transformation and workflow automation and things like that. I think that's level 2, is like automating decisions. And then level 3 is we're now changing our business process because these decisions don't even matter anymore. Mm-hmm. We've completely automated them away. And I think that's, from a maturity perspective, that is something that we strive for, but seems, especially for those getting started, kind of far away. And so, Haluk, I'd ask for your input here. What is your advice for those dipping their toe into AI?
I will second you in this case. Like trustworthiness is going to be really key, and then also another powerful AI that's not being used that much, explainable AI. So like because you need to have those causal connections. So this way you know why certain predictions is coming out of AI. So that's another field that's becoming much more powerful. Another thing that I would suggest to keep an eye on is the combination of AI with the knowledge graph-based training models, because as you know, like knowledge graphs are like curated data with good provenance and so on. So in that sense, they are trustworthy data sets that you can use for like building your AI models and so on. In that case, you are kind of building the trustworthiness into the construction of the models, as well as the curation of the data and the operation of the models and so on in the use. So those are like, and then again, I will emphasize the diversity of the teams is key. You need diverse voices on the table. And so those will be like my suggestions to keep in mind going forward.
I wanna go a little deeper into documentation, right? Because I know that's everyone's favorite job is documenting stuff, right? Whether it's code or data or processes or policies. And it gets to I think a bigger point on centralization, what we should centralize and what we should not centralize. But how do you all approach documentation from hopefully from the very beginning of your experiments and throughout the project life cycle?
If I can go first on this. So in the Bridge to AI program that we are funding, so what we do is like one thing that we are after is the development of guidelines and best practices for use of the generated data by the community. So in that sense, like we asked our project teams to document their thought process from the beginning, from the design phase all the way to the making data available to the general public. So they are documenting all that, like a thought process, how they went about collecting data, and so on. This way, we can use those recordings to generate best practice guidelines to the community to follow. And in that sense, we are calling an experiment. As we go forward these projects, we are going to make mistakes, but we can also learn from our mistakes. But again, the documentation, coming back to your question, is very key, because with documentation, you can backtrack and figure out where you made mistakes and correct accordingly if necessary. And there's always going to be mistakes. Like we shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes, because we can learn from the mistakes. But the thing is like how we can really do the documentation right way, so it's going to be useful to the public when they are trying to use the data that we are generating and models that we are building. In that sense, like that's the key. As you said, like it's not credited work. So most people think it as like a unnecessary burden on them. Right. But we need to really enforce. In the Bridge to AI program, we are really enforcing that. Like this is one of the milestones that they must fill in terms of telling us that they are getting the award for the right reasons. So in that sense, we are really asking them to document at every stage of what they are doing. So that's one of the requirements of the projects that we are funding.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point about learning through the documentation process, right? Because then you have a record of what worked and what didn't work, and how you can go back and fix it. And surely this fits into human-centered models and innovation as well. So how do you approach documentation?
So we have a very simple exercise, and this is probably from my background in academia. Can I hand you the code, and can you run it in your computer? Yeah. Can you run it in your device? Can you do that? And by the way, I have a Mac. So how can we do that? And it's simple, but it works, and it is one of those things that should be a fundamental, right? If I want to be able to share my code and make you be successful at your job, it has to be documented appropriately.
Yeah. Garrett?
Yeah, it's always a challenge. I think any technical team, probably people don't want to do it. Because there's this dynamic, we want you to move faster. Can sometimes be an erroneous thought that like if it's a waste of time basically, but actually if you're doing things right, then it actually can save you time in the long run. I guess I would say one other thing we kind of think about on our team, we have a pretty flat, this is my team at the State Department, operational data science team. We have a very flat structure, and so like if people want to move around, which is part of our model for letting people get new experiences, then you have to be documenting. If people are going to have the ability to take on a new project or slot in, it can't just be that one person there where like that person knows how this runs, and if you give it to anyone else on their computer, it's not going to run. So it's kind of a requirement for our staffing structure to work.
That's great. Well, I think we're getting ready to close. So I do want to end on one note. In 2021, our tagline was kind of AI is achievable. And 2022, our tagline was AI is a team sport. And so in 2023, I'm saying AI is an open discussion. Haluk, we'll start with you and go around and end, and then we'll wrap and pass back to Raul. But what is 2023 AI for you?
AI is going to be at the center of most things that we do in life going forward. So it's unavoidable. We must learn to do it the right way. And so
It's the
we must
future.
work on learning to do it the right way. It's going to be there. We cannot avoid it. But let's learn to do it the right way.
Viv?
I mean, AI is here to stay. I know I'm piggybacking off of you. I'm sorry, but you took a good one.
Yeah. Garrett?
Yeah, I agree. I would just say it is not easy. It is a hard thing to do, and I think the more clear-eyed we are about how difficult it is to do well also, the better, because it's going to take a lot of work. We just in this one discussion, we talked about IT, we talked about workforce, we talked about skill, we've talked about 10 different things, and basically all of those things have to be done well to pull it off. So it's going to be, there's a lot of work to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much, and thanks for the Atlanta Council for bringing this great group together.
Thank you.
We're now going to take a brief pause while our next panel takes the stage. I'd like to now welcome the panelists for our final panel, Piloting and Scaling Data and AI for Mission Impact. Dr. Jane Pinellas will be guiding this final discussion. Jane currently serves as the Chief AI Engineer of the Applied Information Services branch at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory. She leads a diverse team of testers and analysts in rigorous tests and evaluation for JAIC capabilities, as well as the development of test and evaluation-specific products and standards that will support testing of AI-enabled systems across the Department of Defense. Joining Jane will be Marguerite Benson. Marguerite is the founder of Sticky Wicket Advising, where she advises AI startups on how to enable successful technology adoption at federal agencies. Her previous experience includes supporting technology and workforce-focused initiatives as a public sector-focused consultant at McKinsey, and a decade as an analyst and manager at the CIA. We also have on stage Bharat Patel. Bharat, the product lead for Project Linchpin, is an engineer with the Army's Program Executive Office for Intelligence, Electronic Warfare, and Sensors. He will be responsible for delivering trusted AI to the AI-enabled programs across the office's portfolio. And lastly, joining them is John Streising, who is a senior accounts manager for the Department of Defense at NVIDIA, where he is responsible for all aspects of NVIDIA's business with the Army, US Cybercom, DISA, the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, and MITRE. I'll turn it to Jane to begin our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me here today. I won't waste any time, John. My first question is for you, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to vent a little bit. When it comes to scaling and adoption of data-centric philosophies in AI, what's the hardest thing about working with the U.S. government?
So first of all, I love working with the Department of Defense day in and day out. It's a very important mission. I couldn't think of any better customer to serve, quite frankly. I'm still in the Maryland Army National Guard, right, as an Army soldier. But with all that being said, what's the most difficult? I think a lot of times, actually, it's going to be your legacy hardware. It's going to be, some of the things that were mentioned in our previous panel when it comes to policy. A lot of folks are looking for policy first, as opposed to looking at the mission and how to execute the mission, and ultimately how we're going to accomplish the mission. A lot of folks look to hire for some guidance that might not be there, right? Because they're not, they don't know about AI and what all it entails either. So, just getting started a lot of times, and that's where I'm fortunate in my role, where I help them along in making those first few steps, and then once they get rolling, they go. It scales quickly, and it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think Paul Share, in his book, he talks about the idea that when it came to nuclear technology, which AI sometimes is compared to, they dropped the bomb first and then thought about policy second. But whether that was a good idea is probably another panel, maybe at happy hour. But until then, yeah, that's an excellent point. Marguerite, what about you? You've been on both sides of the equation.
I think I'll focus on stakeholder engagement and buy-in, because the people are always going to be fundamental to being successful in any endeavor. And particularly in the government space, you have a multitude of stakeholders, oftentimes scattered across an organization. They all have their own timelines in mind, priority projects in mind, et cetera. And oftentimes you are required to get all of those folks on board and bought into whatever it is you're trying to achieve. So I would say that's probably what I would focus on as the biggest challenge, particularly because in the government space, folks move around very frequently. You might be looking at every 2 years somebody flipping out in whatever the role might be. So that means you could spend a year getting somebody really bought in and championing whatever the project is, and then they move on and you're starting over. So I would focus on stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. And so, Bharat, as our government representative, what are your thoughts on these two issues?
So I actually have never heard of this challenge before.
Fair enough. Me neither.
I'm totally kidding. So from a government perspective, it It is very challenging. Multiple reasons. There's statutory and regulatory things that I just have to do, and sometimes that process is not well communicated to industry through our normal request for information, which really only triggers the technical parts of it, not really the acquisition program start of it. So one, I think we as a government need to better communicate our technical needs as well as our timelines, as well as our approach to industry engagements as a whole. For whatever reason, a lot of government organizations are, I wouldn't say intimidated, but they don't necessarily have an open door policy. Like for Project Lynchpin, I got an open door policy. I'm trying to actually learn from industry on how to acquire AI, on how to license AI, on what the IP strategy looks like for AI. So these are all things that we're trying to do a little bit better on. And I think the last one is, again, the government's ability to articulate what they actually need. Sometimes it doesn't come across the best, especially when we have to do it through a regular paper.
Do you think the government knows what it needs?
I would say they think they do because they put this process in place from I have an operational user who provides feedback into the requirements community, who documents that feedback and then provides a requirements document to the acquisition community. So in that process, they believe they think they do. But where it completely all falls apart is when the program starts to meet those requirements and then they deliver a capability and that capability does not meet the intent of the soldier. And that happens every single time. So again, what we're trying to do is be able to do more minimum viable products, put something out there, learn, and then iterate on the software.
Fair enough. So we've all put our grievances on the table now. One of mine, as a statistician by training, and something that we're all very familiar with, is the idea that we spend like 90% of our time cleaning data, the other 10% complaining about cleaning data. So let's hear about some successes with managing and maintaining data pipelines. Marguerite, can we start with you?
Well, I think I would still focus on the people part of things. Maybe that's in part because I was a leadership analyst at the CIA, so I always have focused on people in my career. And so now I focus very much on the human capital aspect of things. And so when it comes to the data pipeline, I think very much about the knowledge management topic, actually, that the last panel brought up. And it's getting folks aligned on what does that knowledge management piece of the picture need to look like, and what does the process need to be to have in place as an organization. And so that's kind of my quick answer to what could be a very lengthy one.
John?
The Department of Defense has so many sensors that make so much data, and they've been doing this for a very long time. So I think that one of Bharat's biggest challenges right now is trying to figure out what to do with all of this sensor data and how are you going to push AI as far out to the edge as possible. So when you're kind of looking at those data pipelines, I say try to put the certain AI tools as close to where the data is being generated as physically possible. Try to get some of that pre-processing going before it comes back, and then ultimately that's where you'll want to train your algorithms. I think that's kind of how I look at solving that problem. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Let me pull the thread on that a little bit. Quality versus quantity when it comes to data. What's been your experience with that?
Oh, so I'm going to build on his and then.
He has a lot of quantity.
I have, oh my God, I got so much. So, boring side of AI, right? What you just mentioned, cleaning, curating, nobody wants to do it. people want to do it. We're going to
Myself and 3 of my best
Yes.
friends disagree with you, but
one of my goals is to outsource as much of that to OSD, CDAO as possible. So right now I'm working with them to provide them data so they could clean it, curate it, label it, and host it in my environment. So that's one part of the strategy. It gets a little complicated when we have to actually build data agreements with
that was my next
functional
question.
managers, such as, say, NGA, National Geospatial Agency, right? They're the functional manager for imagery, and they have a ton of imagery. We provide imagery into their database, Army sensors into NGA database, and now I have to go and ask for my data back. But, we're working through that. But again, part of that strategy is being able to leverage external resources and organizations that are responsible for providing a service back out to the DoD. The other part, going back to quality versus quantity, and so within our portfolio, intelligence systems and analytics portfolio, which falls under electronic warfare and sensors, ton of sensors. Intel sensors, Army Intel, non-Intel. Some of that data actually never leaves the battlefield. It sits on a tank. So as part of this whole strategy, we are thinking through a deliberate data collection strategy in support of machine learning. How do I get that data out of an environment that's typically never been moved? Only because these programs haven't thought about it. They haven't thought about bringing that data back in because all they're doing is a fires mission. So we're figuring out the data collection part. Now, quantity versus quality. I guess it's really going to depend. I have a lot of quantity, but it's horrible. The data is not at a quality where you could even apply some of the newer models and the newer techniques and the architectures. So as we are building new sensors, the quality is going to get better. And then our approach to integrating AI will improve the sensor to shooter and those aspects. But
yeah. So there are a couple of things in there that I want to kind of touch on. One, the idea of deliberate data collection for AI. I love that, right? What we're doing now so often is just looking at the data that we already have, and we're trying to turn it into something that sometimes it's just not, and it may never be. So the idea of deliberate data collection definitely resonates. Another thought, on quantity versus quality, there is actually such a thing as too much, right? Especially when it's bad. In early days of Project Maven, we hit a point where our models were just not getting any better. And then we looked at the data, and that was supervised, right? So we looked at labels, and we had to relabel a good 30% of the data because the label quality was so terrible. And then we ended up having to use a lot less data, basically, to get the same or better quality models. So yes, we do have a lot. The question is to be very deliberate about it, I think. And I think that's something that people are missing a lot. We kind of just tend to throw everything in the kitchen sink. Okay, so let's talk about trends in the industry. In terms of scaling and in terms of data specifically and data-centric applications, what are you seeing in the industry? What's resonating with you right now?
Well, obviously, large language models, generative AI. We're at the inflection point for artificial intelligence right now, the iPhone moment, as Jensen likes to say, where everybody has it in their pocket. Everybody's using it for various use cases. We are seeing a lot of experiments being, maybe done in the cloud and then coming on-prem a lot of times as compute costs have skyrocketed, and access to the underlying technology needed to train algorithms is a scarce resource, right? Yeah, and we've seen a huge explosion of small companies who are starting up and adopting this technology and taking it to market, which is really quite an exciting time to be in this industry. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you seeing, Marguerite?
So speaking of small companies, at my startup, we are an AI-powered knowledge graph, which was also referenced during the last panel. So I think the insights that a knowledge graph can provide are something that we're going to start seeing more of, more broadly. I would also say that from talking with government stakeholders and asking them about their needs when it comes to AI-derived insights, a lot of them are saying, I don't want to buy more software. I just want the insights that your software can provide. And I think that's sort of an interesting piece to consider, given where we are now, coming into the latter part of 2023, which is, are people feeling overwhelmed by all the software and all the AI applications? Is there a point where it's too much? So that's something that I think about.
Barbara, anything to add? Or any thoughts on knowledge graphs and ontologies for linchpin specifically?
Oh, so yes.
So many thoughts.
Need it, love it. So from a trends perspective, right now, there are companies popping up every day. There's companies out there that span the spectrum from large language models to an object detection thing for something to automated workflows. How do I take advantage of all that? How do I create an environment where I can quickly contract to some of these companies, give them specific requirements and needs, test out their products in a secure, trusted environment, and then actually deploy those out? So the trends that I'm seeing is that more and more companies are coming into this space. So how do, as a DoD, as an Army, incentivize and create opportunities for them to actually have access to our data, but not necessarily give our data out? Access to our data, because every single company wants data to apply their tool or technique. But again, how does the DoD and the Army protect their data, bring industry partners inside of their environment to test out their capabilities? And that's one of our goals.
I would answer your question with federated machine learning, which is another trend I think we're seeing as well, with a lot of exciting possibilities, especially in the government space, where there's so many concerns about accesses and controls. So I think that's an exciting area to watch as well.
Anything to add?
I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts about what you're seeing as far as trends in the industry, given your previous and current role.
Well, we've been focused obviously so much on LLMs, and especially myself with bringing in my bias into this, the assurance of those models, right? Now, I know a lot of people use the term hallucination. We don't usually talk about it as hallucination in the sense that it's not, when the model produces information that's not factual, it wasn't trained to produce factual information. It was trained to produce the next most likely word or letter or token, however. So the model is not actually wrong when it's producing non-factual information. Now, is it dangerous? Absolutely, because it sounds usually, those models are extremely good at mimicking our grammar and things like that, so it always sounds plausible. And that's where the danger is. But hallucination, strictly speaking, is not really, it has more of a negative connotation than the models deserve. But having said that, the next big push that we're seeing is multimodal models, right? The idea of combining as much as possible, again, with the data we have on submarines, for instance, right? All of the different signals, all of the chat logs. So very interesting problems in the multimodal space. Very interesting health applications also of large language models. Doing some great work for DARPA on using multimodal and large language models to triage and things like that. So, so great applications there. A lot of focus on mission autonomy, right? The idea that we're going to lose comms in certain environments, and how do you operate autonomously past that point? And a huge focus on trustworthiness and assurance, of course. It's a great time to be working in these.
So you get to see a number of different companies, right? In a number of different companies' products, they come in and talk to you. So do you think that industry is doing enough around trusted AI and making sure that what we're bringing to market is safe and secure? And able to be used by the Department of Defense, the Army, CIA?
That's a tough question. I was supposed to ask more questions. But having said that, is the industry doing enough in the sort of trustworthy AI, the AI assurance space? I don't think so. Yeah. And you'll see CDAO recently put out findings from a study on a responsible AI toolkit, and JHU APL helped with it, but so did Carnegie Mellon, and so did MITRE. So it was a variety of stakeholders involved. And you'll see that, there are some tools that exist, but they're primarily focused on bias, right? Really just kind of summarizing data and, maybe figuring out how to diminish some of the effects. But when it comes to actual benchmarking, when it comes to figuring out how to actually improve the responsible AI implications of your models, we're still very much at ground zero for that. So I think it's a very rich space to be working in. And honestly, I don't think there's been enough time really to work on it. People were so excited about just developing models, right, for the longest time. And then finally now we've hit the frontier of, oh, wait a minute, we should probably test and make sure it works, otherwise we can't field it. So now that area is getting exciting. So I anticipate now that industry will focus more on it, and we'll have some really great things to look forward to in that space. Okay, so we only have a few minutes remaining. So with that, I'm going to turn your question kind of back to you. In terms of building in AI test and evaluation, building in AI assurance, building in safeguards into planning, procurement processes, and things like that, what are you doing for Linchpin?
Definitely a few things. So when the department put out the software bill of materials, start figuring out safeguards around the supply chain for software, how we do that. We are getting ready to release an AI BOM, bill of material, that starts to expand on the software bill of material and really focuses on the data that's used by industry partners to develop models, even to the point where can we get down to what third-party organizations are labeling data in the open source market. So we're trying to wrap around security before even it comes into our environment. The other aspect that we're trying to do, way back when we separated hardware from software, our goal is to separate software from AI, and that's going to allow us to do a couple of things. So one, it's really going to tap into the small businesses and non-traditionals that are focused in on AI, but by separating it, we could turn off the AI when we need to and not really impact the software in an operational use case. So those are kind of the two areas where we're focused, and there's a few others, but.
That's awesome. Although when you say AI BOM, that triggers me as an AI assurance person. All right. John, what about you? What are your thoughts on this?
There's a number of different things that we're working on, setting up guardrails. There's retrieval augmented generation where, when it outputs some sort of answer, it's cited, much like an academic paper would be, right? And there's a number of different things that you can do in order to try to get at some of this problem with hallucination and being able to be able to trust the AI. And those are just a couple of them. Yeah. And I'm seeing them pick up steam and being implemented every day, across the government now at this point.
Absolutely. What about you, Marguerite?
So I would say on the industry side, and specifically in the startup space, there's definitely a thirst for guidance. So I know if DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, has responsible AI guidelines, which are very helpful. And there's other ethical frameworks and otherwise that are available, but I think there's always a thirst for more on that front. And then going kind of deeper on the data side, there's also an interest in kind of keeping tabs on the pulse of the conversations in the government space on how we should be using commercially available information, publicly available information, and some of the kind of thorny areas that you can end up getting into in terms of the data that you're pulling into your model. So I think it's something that everyone in the space is pretty well aware of, I hope, and following these things closely so that we can make sure that we've got the most trustworthy, responsible, explainable outputs that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the RAG example that you gave, that really helps both with traceability, with explainability, and trustworthiness, certainly. So that's really a great
It's
example.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and it takes away some of the black boxes.
There's
of it.
ways to apply that concept to other AI use cases as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to one of the audience questions. I really like this question, and we're going to start with you on this. So the question is, what parts of AI testing and auditing would be the least practical for you to outsource as the US government? But I want to expand that to the AI kind of life cycle in general. What's the least practical for you to outsource? And for you to, what is the last thing that you want to work on? What do you think the government should really be responsible for themselves rather than outsourcing to industry?
So that's a fantastic question. So outsourcing T&E is probably not going to be a thing for us. I think
Interesting.
It'll be a third-party organization that is separate from your model training companies, but it'll still be in the control of it could be an FFRDC, it could be our Army's AI Integration Center, but it'll be a third-party government organization that is providing the recommendations on the T&E. So performance, basic performance, yes, that's not too exciting, but we want to start looking at other T&E approaches, whether it's adversarial concepts, we want to start testing against that. But all of that is going to be more of a government function as part of the pipeline.
Interesting. Okay. Margaret?
I would say the last thing that should be outsourced, meaning it should not be outsourced, it would be kind of the final say of a subject matter expert who is an internal government personnel. And in that sense, you can't outsource the in-depth knowledge of the mission of your organization, of the organizational context that you're operating in the kind of firsthand experience of how that model's output will be utilized. And so you could bring in subject matter experts from outside to weigh in on different aspects with it kind of across the AI lifecycle, but fundamentally, you're going to need that in-house expertise to
That's a great
weigh
point.
in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's an art and a science, and you can outsource the science somewhat readily, but the art has to come from somebody in uniform, fundamentally.
Yeah.
John?
So I agree with both those answers. And kind of the way I think about it is, what is an inherently government function, right? And if this AI capability is something to support, a contractual kind of function of government, then, the oversight should come from maybe the contracting office or whatever. But if it's within the Department of Defense, within the intelligence communities, there are inherently government functions where you have to be part of the government in order to make this decision, correct? And if the AI is going to be augmenting those decisions or whatever it's going to produce, if it's going to produce something that is an inherently government function, then the oversight should be from the government and not necessarily contracted out as like a third-party source. That's kind of how I've thought about it philosophically as I've had to come up with this, over the course of the past few years. Yeah.
Let's finish up with this very positive question. Can you give us an example of a pilot AI project that your organization has successfully launched or scaled, or maybe is in the process of launching and scaling?
Project Linchpin with the Army.
Well, it's a buy one, get one for you.
No, well, I mean, Jane, you know all the stuff that I do with Johns Hopkins. But one of the ones as an Army infantry guy that I thought was really cool was the medical assistant large language model at the edge. I think that's a great proof of concept, and I look forward to hopefully that pilot going, Army and DoD wide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mine?
Yeah.
Oh. So believe it or not, we already have 25 small businesses as part of our AI ecosystem.
Well done.
Whether they're small business innovative research programs that are working on synthetic data generation, that are working on some NLP capability to help one of our operational software products. There's also model object detection for electronic intelligence. In addition to, Undersecretary of the Army has an initiative called VISTA. So under VISTA, it's a partnership between large and small businesses. I have about 12 small businesses aligned under project linchpin that are all kind of developing different aspects of the AI portfolio. And then there's the X-Tech. X-Tech's, I have about four companies aligned. So through this ecosystem, we're exploring different tools, techniques, approaches, and then our goal is over the next 6 to 12 months, put those tools, techniques into a closed operational environment for us to continue to explore and then determine what are the right ones that we want to actually put into production.
Awesome. Marguerite, you get the last word of the panel.
Well, I will broaden my answer a little bit to say that in terms of kind of exciting, successful efforts that I've seen and that are ongoing would be the upskilling of the federal workforce and the provision of tools that kind of meet them where they are in order to help do their jobs in this space. So on the upskilling front, just the courses that I've seen coming out from DoD components within the Intel community to provide kind of foundational AI knowledge, data literacy, those types of things are critical. And then along with those, more low-code, no-code platforms, automated machine learning, and so forth, where folks we can broaden the aperture from not just having our data scientists be kind of the only ones working on an AI project, but making sure that the folks that they need to be engaging with also can be supporting them both from kind of that knowledge effort and also being able to share some skills as part of that as well.
I love that you started and ended with people. That's always the most important part. Well, thank you very much to all my panelists, and thanks for having us again.
All right. Thank you, Jane.
Wow, what a fantastic group of panels. Now I'd like to introduce Kyle Michael for some brief remarks from the private sector, and then I'll come back for a minute to close us out. Kyle is the Chief Innovation Officer at Accenture Federal Services, leading the team's innovation strategy on technology, including cloud, digital platforms, analytics, AI, and virtual and augmented reality. He supports clients across the federal government. Kyle?
Thanks, Lloyd. I came into this session excited about the topic, and I have to say I'm leaving even more enthusiastic. Just such a great session. Thanks to Lloyd and the Atlantic Council for bringing together really a public and private perspective across this really exciting topic. I have to say each panel built on one another terrifically, and I learned something listening to each and every one of you, so thanks for that. I think it's a great example of how when you bring different perspectives together, we can solve some of the toughest challenges around emerging technologies. But I think it's also worth a thank you to those listening today, because I truly believe, and we heard from the panelists across multiple topics today, that we all have to learn and be engaged in this topic. So thanks for taking the time, both for those here in person and for those who are going to be listening remotely, both now and in the replay. You know, as I think about takeaways for a minute, there's a few things that come to mind from the various topics today. The first of which is fundamental. It all starts with data. And I know that's an obvious one coming in, but I think we heard it over and over again. We have to start thinking about data as a product. We have to bring it to the forefront. We can't just talk about it. We need to be working and starting the activities that are necessary to bring data to the forefront in order to be able to power an AI-powered government. The second one is human plus machine in my mind. You know, there's this scary side of AI where you say, well, AI is going to come and take over everything we're going to do. I think we heard pretty clearly that's not the case. We also heard very clearly that the human has to be at the center of everything that we do. And so I think it's really important that we think about that human side, that end user that has to learn and understand what this means to them as well, and always think about that human plus machine and how we can bring those together for specific outcomes. Lastly, I think two maybe calls to action for us. The first of which is around education. We all have a responsibility at all levels, at all parts of an agency and organization to stay on top of the latest technology, understand what these technologies can do. If we just look a year ago, and we talked briefly about generative AI, if you just think about that a year ago and you ask folks what was the technology capable of, I think you get a very different answer than you might get today from that spectrum of folks. And I imagine in 6 months or 12 months, it's going to be even a greater disparity in terms of what those technologies can do for us. So I think that's call to action number one, is we have to have that continual thirst for knowledge. I think call to action number two is we can't just talk about data. We can't just talk about pilots or proof of concepts. We have to roll up our sleeves. We have to bring people together and we need to be thinking about how we can move forward on the data side and that foundation that isn't always as much fun, but certainly is necessary. And then also on the pilot side, thinking about outcomes and thinking about how we bring that to change the way that we serve citizens, to change the way that the government meets its mission. And I think if we get that right, it can be really powerful. There's challenges out there for sure. We heard in the last panel talk about responsible AI and making sure we get trustworthiness, make sure we get to ethical AI and transparent AI. We can't move forward without considerations around those important aspects of AI. But I think when we do, we're going to get it right. And I think there's going to be a great opportunity for an AI-powered government. And I think one of the summaries, I think it was in our second discussion, was AI is here to stay. And I think that's clear in every day in how we work and how we live. I'm excited to continue that discussion. And so with that, Lloyd, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, I hope everyone watching or enjoying this discussion or reading our content online found it both informative and hopefully practical and useful. I want to thank today's speakers for taking the time out of their busy schedule to actually come here in person. It's really been great to see people across the table. I want to also give a special thanks to Brian and to Jane for both participating in these discussions and leading them. I want to thank the always professional Atlantic Council events team and my staff, Coley Felt, Solomon Wise, and Raul Brenz, for their help making this event happen. And finally, I'd like to thank the generous support and partnership of Accenture Federal Services and Amazon Web Services for making this work and this event possible. Thanks for joining us today.